Welcome to Caregiving Club On Air. This podcast is dedicated to the millions of family caregivers who want wellness tips and self-care solutions, who seek expert advice, and who want news about healthy aging and how to create well home design in our forever homes. I'm Sherri Snelling, a corporate gerontologist, author, and educator, a TV interviewer, host, and news commentator. I'm joining you from Southern California, where our interviews and news take us all across the country to explore the many ways to help you on your caregiving journey and to lift you up here at Caregiving Club On Air. Welcome to Caregiving Club On Air. I am your host, Sherri Snelling, and for this July episode, we are going to focus on the July National Sandwich Generation Month. And as many of you know, sandwich generation is defined as those caregivers who are caring for younger children, typically under the age of 18, although they could be also college age, as well as an older loved one, such as an older parent, in-law, or grandparent. And as we know, caregiving can bring a lot of silver linings. So we're also going to celebrate the National Day of Joy with our expert guest and interview today with Saudia Gajadhar. She's back. We've had her on our podcast a couple of times every year about this time to talk about the National Day of Joy survey, but she's also got some other things to share about comfort keepers and their role in the recent PBS documentary called Caregiving. And then in caregiver wellness news, again, we're going to focus on some of the lifestyle changes for the sandwich generation. But we're also going to give you some global self-care tips for caregivers because it's International Self-Care Day on July 24th. And we're going to talk about a new study that recently came out that shows that those who are caring for someone with dementia, particularly when those adults wander, have increased stress over the normal stressors that we typically see for caregivers. And then we're also going to talk about the new trend in kind of this green movement and being outdoors and just, getting a little bit more movement into our life. And it's called rucking is the new walking. So we're going to tell you what that's all about. And then as we go into the interview with Saudia, I'm going to talk a little bit about some information from my book, Me Time Monday. What is the difference between joy and happiness? Because obviously they're very connected, but they're also a little bit different. So I'm going to explain what those differences are. And then in Well Home Design News, we're going to go back to the sandwich generation. We're going to talk about the cost of care. There have been some recent studies and surveys that have come out, and also some articles that have been in the Wall Street Journal and Time Magazine and New York Times and others, all focused now on the challenges of the sandwich generation, particularly when it comes to financial caregiving. So we're going to share a little bit of that. And then we're also going to talk about how July is National Social Wellness Month, as well as National Family Reunion Month. And we're going to give you some tips and actually some really great services and solutions that you can use if you're trying to get together with family for reunions or just, to touch base, and you live maybe long distance. How do you do that without spending a whole lot of money? And can we do that using some of the virtual tech tools that are out there? And the answer is yes. And we're going to share those with you. So with all of that, let's go ahead and take a look at our caregiver wellness news. So for our caregiver wellness news, as I mentioned, July is when we celebrate National Sandwich Generation Month, which is defined as those family caregivers who are still caring for young children or even kids who might be in their teens or just back from college, but you're still responsible financially for them. They're still living with you. And then simultaneously, you're also caring for an older parent, an in-law, or a grandparent. So you're kind of sandwiched in between these two generations, and that obviously creates a lot of additional challenges for family caregivers. Most importantly, I think, is the how do you find your me time when you're juggling all these balls and maybe also working, which 7 out of 10 caregivers do, as we know. So I wanted to read you just some real quick stats. And what was interesting is I did my research is with caregiving in general, and especially with the sandwich generation. The statistics are kind of all over the place. So there's a lot of different organizations now that are doing surveys and doing studies and obviously taking a deep dive into, family caregiving and how it's impacting our society and our workplaces and all these other things. And unfortunately, the statistics are a little bit all over the place. So I just gathered them all and I thought I would kind of share them with you so you could get a sense. But I think in general, most people default to there was a study that was done by the National Alliance for Caregiving, but this was about 5 years ago. And also caring across generations also got involved in this particular study. And they said that 28% of all caregivers are sandwich generation, which represents about 11 million people. Now, a more recent study that was done by the University of Phoenix and Motherly, which is an organization that is dedicated to working moms. They actually did a study called Moms in the Sandwich Generation this year, 2025. They say that about 23% of all adults are sandwich generation, about 61 million. I think that stat's got to be off. So I'm not sure that one's actually very accurate. What we do know is that most of the sandwich generation is, of course, what we consider Gen X. So the average age are people in their, mid 40s, for age 46 to about 47, 48. That's typical. But we also know now that a lot of the older millennials are part of this sandwich generation, and even some of the older Gen Z, which is our youngest generation. So about a third of all of our sandwich generation caregivers are millennials and Gen Z, and that's they say 1 in 4 working family caregivers is a millennial. So you're working plus you're also caregiving, just in general, not sandwich generation. And 1 in 2 is under the age of 50. So one third of all of those folks are then also sandwich generation, where they also have kids in the mix. And then Pew has also done some really great research over the years, and in July 2022, they said half of adults ages 18 to 29 were living with one or both of their parents, compared to only 44%, so about 6% points higher in 2010. So that's grown. Nearly, what's the other Pew the one? Oh, among those in their 40s, more than half, about 54%, have a parent age 65 or older and have either a young child or an adult child that they're assisting financially in the last 12 months. So about 23% of all caregivers are sandwich generation. Anyway, it goes on from there. There are some other stats from University of Michigan Department of Psychiatry, Journal of American Geriatric Society, the Milken Institute. Lots of people are using, these different stats. But I think in general, what we can say is that about a quarter of all caregivers are actually caring for two generations at the same time. So this is creating a lot of shifts in lifestyle, certainly. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the costs of that care, and also the aspect of multi-generational living, which has actually been growing now over about the last 10 years. We've seen an uptick. And whether that's having an ADU in your backyard or just having, mom and dad or grandparents move in with you, or vice versa, maybe you and your family move in with them. We're seeing a lot more of that. But, also careers are impacted. We know one third of caregivers who are in those peak years, probably sandwich generation, most of them are leaving work, one third of them, to take care of all the people they need to care for. We know that when it comes to financial planning, there could be a big overlap, right? Because you're pretty much paying for most of what your children need up through the age of maybe even 25, particularly if you're helping with college, tuition and costs. But then at the same time, if your parents maybe don't have enough savings and the cost of care has grown so dramatically over the years, you may also then be helping them in their later years. And some of those years can overlap, but you're looking at a good like 40 years of helping to finance a lot of costs of care for all of your loved ones, which is making it, I know, much more challenging for families out there. And then I came across a really interesting article, and I think I'll weave it into an article I'm going to write on the sandwich generation for my blog. But it's things like even cars. When you're considering a car, is it going to work for maybe your smaller kids, but it is also going to work for maybe your older loved one who has a wheelchair? And are you going to be able to get them around town? So there's a lot of considerations I think that are out there for the sandwich generation. Now I also mentioned that in July we practice self-care International Self-Care Day, which is on July 24th. And I thought it would be fun, and I included most of these, I think all of them. Let's just take a quick look. Yep, all of them are in my book, in different sections of the book because they're relating to different things. But I took a look at all of the different self-care practices out there for caregivers that come from other countries, so a global perspective. And I'll just do a quick rundown, but what you can do is check out our Self-Care in 7 Minutes video, which is our Me Time Monday wellness hacks that we do every Monday. And the one that's going to post on July 22nd is going to be this international self-care tips. So just really quickly, from Japan, we have forest bathing. From India, we have yoga and breathing. From Scandinavia, we have Swedish death cleaning. From Italy and Greece, we have the Mediterranean diet. From England, we have literary heroes that help us with daydreaming and kind of that elastic thinking that is so important for our intellectual wellness. From Australia, we are practicing awe and discovering things like the walkabout that the Aboriginal culture has given us. From Denmark, we have huga. I think I'm saying that right. A Danish friend of mine said, "Do you?" She said my pronunciation is just a little off, but huga, I think is how you say it. Huga. The Netherlands, we get Nixon. You're going to learn what that's about. From France, we have mindful and social eating. And then from Finland, we have something called Saizu. And if you don't know what that is, you'll have to watch the video and find out. And then I mentioned also there's this new trend in wellness, and it was particularly focused on women and wellness trends. It was some information I get typically from the Global Wellness Institute. They do such really great weekly bullet points on the latest trends that are happening out there. And they state that rucking is the new walking. So, what is that all about? Well, here's why I wanted to bring this to you because in my book, Me Time Mondays, you guys know, those of you who have read it, or heard me talk about it, give a speech about it or whatever, you know that my whole focus is how do we help our family caregivers find just even 7 minutes of self-care time. It's so difficult to carve out that me time when you're juggling all those balls and you're caring for your loved ones. And again, if you're sandwich generation, you're caring for kids, you're caring for older parents or in-laws or grandparents, and where do you the ball that gets dropped is the one that says me, right? So, that's my whole mantra is how do I help you still find that balance in life? And it can come in little small increments. I think that's the big thing that really breaks the barrier down from doing it because I know I was one of those people that felt like, well, if I can't get on a treadmill for 30 minutes or I can't go to the gym and work out and take a class, for 45 minutes plus the travel time or whatever to get there, um, then that's I can't do it. And the reality is, when we do things in smaller increments, we're actually more successful at it. That helps give us a little dopamine hit in our brains. That's part of the neuroscience, the happiness hormones I write about. And also it encourages us to kind of keep going because it is very doable, right? So what I liked about this rucking is the new walking is the concept is look, most of us are trying to keep moving, and particularly women. Now we know that, again, two-thirds of all Alzheimer's adults are women. We know that walking and moving around during the day is really essential. That's one of the 14 lifestyle habits that we can adopt that are going to help us with brain health and maybe even be preventive for things like dementia in the future. So a lot of us have, taken up walking, and that's great because it's low impact, on your joints, particularly as you get older. You don't have to pound the pavement and run a marathon. You don't have to do all these crazy things, and you can take a 10-minute walk. And if you're outside and you're kind of in nature, it's going to give you definitely that brain health boost as well. So the rucking part of this is okay. If you've got, if you've gone hiking, you know what rucking is, right? You've got your backpack on and it's your rucksack and you're taking it with you kind of thing. Well, rucking now, you can still do it as a backpack, but they also sell now in a lot of the sports equipment places weighted vests that you can wear. And what it is it's something called what I would call habit stacking. Now, habit stacking is something I write about in the Me Time Monday book, and it's where you take something you're already doing. Maybe it's a habit you've already established, like walking, and you pack something on top of it that is also beneficial so that your brain doesn't have to really process doing a whole nother thing. It's just kind of habit stacked, and now we're kind of achieving two different, things at one time. And so, we know as we get older, particularly as women, bone strength and bone density is a really big issue. We lose a lot of that bone mass and muscle mass. We have to keep going, and a lot of it is through doing things like body pump and weightlifting and, resistance training and all of that. So when you're already walking and then you put on a backpack that has a few things in it, or you put on one of these weighted vests, very similar, by the way, to a weighted blanket that we might use in memory care and assisted living that creates that comfort because it kind of just gives you this resistance, but also it's a comforting feeling. I think it's great because now you're kind of doing 2 things. You're getting your aerobic exercise through your walking and your cardio, but you're also getting your resistance training in a way and some bone strength training because you've put on a couple extra pounds. And the only caveat I would say is if you have issues with your heart and you're taking maybe medication, if you have issues with your joints and they're very, very painful, maybe you've even got arthritis that you're dealing with, or even kind of osteoporosis, you want to be really careful about this because obviously adding any kind of weight is going to put a lot of pressure on your heart, pump that blood and oxygen, through all the arteries and everything. So I will say that just be very, very careful. And the typical prescription when we do any kind of weighted blanket or weighted vest or whatever is definitely less than 10% of your body weight. I would say I would make it 20% or less, like definitely start small. Do something that's just 1 or 2 pounds. That's fairly easy. It doesn't really kill your joints, but don't go out there with 5-pound weights or 15-pound weights or something. You want to do things slowly, but it is kind of interesting. And I think it is another way, again, for habit stacking. We're already doing something, and this could be a little bit helpful. And it does say that it helps with obesity and arthritis. So that's interesting. This study that was done. It also says that you achieve a higher metabolic weight rate and you don't regain lost weight over time. So it helps with that because I know for some of us, I would include myself in this list, we're kind of a little bit of the yo-yo dieters, right? We're up, we're down, we're up, we're down. How do we keep it off? And then, of course, it improves your strength, endurance, and bone density, as I mentioned. And it's really the article that I was reading and the study I was reading about was done with postmenopausal women. So we know that after menopause, those pounds come on really easily, and it's frightening to try to get them off. This is one way maybe to help. And then it says it also reduces stress and anxiety, improves mood and cognitive function, and provides more mental clarity. And I'm going to write a blog because I came up with this term, the cog fog. So your cognitive fog, your brain fog, it helps with that. So, which again is similar to what we find in the weighted blankets. So anyway, and then a lot of the gyms like Peloton and Equinox and others are actually offering classes that give you these rucking type exercises. Garmin is coming out with a tracker on their smart wearable that has an app that is about rucking. So, it's kind of it's out there. It's one of the trends that I just wanted to share with you. And so I thought that would be kind of interesting. Now, the one other study I came across that I just wanted to share is a brand new study that just came out. And we already know that if you're caring for someone with dementia, we know that those caregivers have about 2 to 3 times the level of depression of normal caregivers. We know you've got 15% less antibodies, and that's part of your immunity and your immune strength to fight off colds and flus and things like that. And we have a lot more stress, right? So, this new study showed that caregivers of loved ones with dementia who have wandered and become lost actually have even more elevated levels of stress. And it's because you're in absolute constant anticipatory stress, which is the worst kind. It's where we are anticipating something going wrong and that lasts and lingers with us all day long. So we're in that fight or flight. posture in terms of how our internal workings are going on physically, and with our what we call the HPA access, and our stress responses. And so it's because we are worried about them getting lost, having an accident. So there's a higher burden on these family caregivers and a lot more distress. And I just want to do a shout out because you guys know that I do some work with some startup companies in the age tech care tech space. One company that I've been working with lately is called Theora Care. They actually have a really great smart wearable. It's a watch, but it's designed specifically for older adults. So as opposed to the Apple Watch, which a lot of our older parents and grandparents have embraced and loved, that's designed for everybody, right? And then some of the apps, some of the apps are not so great, that are fall detection and some of these others. Whereas your care, as I got to know them and understood their technology, and they do use neural networking and artificial intelligence and all that, it really is designed specifically for older adults in mind. And so I'm going to have a link on the website, but I worked on the No Fear campaign with them. And certainly they address these things of falling, but also of wandering. So the GPS that's built into this smart wearable is really helpful. And a lot of caregivers who have loved ones they want to keep at home, who want to stay a little bit independent, but they're worried, right? You're in anticipatory stress all the time about wandering. You can have a little bit more peace of mind if you use some of these tech tools that we have out there. So, shout out to them. Um, and then, before we go into this great interview with Sadia, and I have to say, I think I say it during the interview, which we taped a couple days ago. But Sadia is our Triple Crown winner. We often, I like to get new faces, new guests, new experts, but I also like to have the people back who have such great things to share with us. And every year, Comfort Keepers does the National Day of Joy survey. And so we like to find out what is the latest news, and that's what Sadia is going to talk to us about. But she's also going to tell us that this year they did something else that was really special, which was to sponsor and participate in the PBS documentary that was also co-produced or executive produced by the actor Bradley Cooper, and it's called Caregiving, so you can still stream it. But the National Day of Joy was last month, but because Sadia was so busy with all of the things that they were doing with PBS, because they did a premiere and events all over the country and all that. She wasn't able to get to us, in June. So we said, well, we'll have you on the July because, hey, let's face it, we should be practicing joy and happiness all year long. And all the information is still great. But before we go into that interview, I just wanted to share with you quickly because this is also in my book, and it's also going to be an upcoming self care in 7 minutes video. There's a difference between happiness and joy. And I wanted to just share this with you. So, happiness is really about external factors. It's about the moments, it's about the people, the places, the things, the feelings that we have. And it's somewhat of a fleeting emotion, right? You get a burst of happiness and maybe it kind of lingers for a little bit. You get that dopamine release, it's making you feel good or whatever. Um and but it's not as long lasting. And you can't be happy every day. I mean, happiness might be the goal, but to have constant happiness would be quite boring. And also, we wouldn't even know we were happy because, in order to understand happiness, you've got to have the downside. You have to have the contrast, right? You have to understand the more challenging times, the darker times, the sad times, whatever it happens to be, so that we can understand and appreciate and have gratitude for the happiness moments and memories that we have in our life. And that's just the roller coaster of life. And it gives, I think what it also does is because we know that things are not always going to be the same, this constant happiness, it's not that we're looking for the gloom and doom that might be happening, but if those things do happen to occur in our lives, we have the hope that we know it's going to go back up and we're going to be happy. And by the way, I know I've talked about happiness before, but the happiness U curve, which is in my book, is really interesting. It's based off of research that was done over a 20-year period, and it was done globally in different cultures and races and genders and ages and all that. And what it shows us is that we are actually our happiest in our 70s and 80s. which is pretty amazing because I think a lot of people don't think that. They think, oh no, you're happy when you're younger, right? And you're carefree and you don't have responsibilities. I think pretty much everybody knows there's a dip in midlife. This is why we have midlife crises because we've got so many responsibilities and mortgages and kids and everything going on in our lives and careers and all that. But I did find it really interesting because I think it is a paradox. I think a lot of people don't think as we get older, we're facing, you know, things that our physical performance is more challenged, eyesight, hearing, joints, all that kind of stuff we were just talking about. But actually there's something about kind of surviving and becoming wise and having all this experience in life that is really satisfying, and we learn a lot of lessons. Anyway, very fascinating. You can read more about it in my book. Now let me tell you the difference between happiness and joy. Joy is about the internal. So where happiness is the external, it kind of requires somebody or something to create a happiness moment for you. Joy is inside. Okay. And joy is about inner peace and contentment. It's about gratitude and acceptance. And it's not getting that burst of dopamine. It is more of a constant. Joy is kind of a state of being. And it really is more about how you feel about yourself, not how others make you feel. So, other people can make us happy, can make us laugh, can make us feel in love, whatever that is, whatever you're happy about. But joy is about how we feel about ourselves, and are we feeling good about life? Are we feeling like, you're living a good life, your best life? And it's really about your belief and your relationship also with a higher power. So I wanted to just share that because I think it's really important to note the two things. They are often very used interchangeably. And while they're certainly connected, because happiness can create, joy. If we kind of, for instance, think about how grateful we are we have certain person in our life, and that is the joy. That's the long lasting versus the little moments, we're grateful we have this person in our life because they just did something really great for us or whatever. They made us feel really special. That's the moment, that's the happiness, but the joy is the longer lasting. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting, and I thought it was a great segue now into my third interview. We've had her on for 3 years running now, and I know we'll have her back next year as well. But this is Saudia Gajadhar, who still has the best title, I think, of anybody that I've heard of. It's Chief Happiness Officer for Comfort Keepers. And she's here to tell us not only about this year's survey that they do for the National Day of Joy, but also, as I mentioned, the PBS documentary Caregiving that they were very instrumental in. And they actually had a Comfort Keepers, a professional caregiver who was actually featured. So here is my interview with Saudia Gajadhar. So again, I am so thrilled to have our guest on this episode, Saudia Gajadhar, who is the Chief Happiness Officer at Comfort Keepers. And she's got so much great information to share with us about the National Day of Joy, a new PBS caregiving documentary. So Saudia, welcome back to Caregiving Club on Air.
I'm so happy to be back here, Sherri. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Well, you have the distinction of being our Triple Crown winner. You're our only guest that we've had on 3 times because every year we love to hear about the new National of Joy
Wow.
survey. So, and our first question typically to guests is where are we talking to you from? But you have an interesting story because you're in the middle of a transition and a move. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, I actually live in California. My parents live in Orlando, in that Orlando area. They're in their 80s and 90s. And my new husband and I are actually moving to that area so that we can be closer to them and sort of give them the help that they need to have a close family member nearby. So that's going to be a big thing, but I'm so happy to do it. I feel so honored to be able to give back to them in some small way to, just be there to provide the support that they need. I think it's
Uh,
just been really tough trying to help them from all the way across the country.
Yeah, absolutely. It is so hard when we are living long distance from our loved ones. And congratulations again on your recent nuptials.
Thank you.
I know we talked and it sounded like it was a fantastic celebration. So Um, well, Sadia, before we jump into all of the good works around National Day of Joy that you've been doing, remind our audience who may not have caught you on our previous episodes a little bit about what are the services that Comfort Keepers delivers? Because we know now, I mean, it's been, decades now where people are saying we want to live longer in our homes, but it becomes really tough as we get older to do that independently. We need a little extra help. What are the things where Comfort Keepers can help families?
Yeah. Well, Comfort Keepers is a leading provider of in-home care for any adults that need it. Typically it tends to be older adults, but it's really anybody that needs that extra assistance at home. Our goal is to really care for people in the comfort of their own homes because we know that's where they prefer to be. That's just such a big future trend of caregiving, is to try to keep them where they want to be, where their rhythms of daily life are. And at Comfort Keepers, that really means think about all the things that you need your loved one help with, whether it's mobility assistance, transportation, like errands, nutrition, bathing, and just even things like simple companionship. And as I talk now, it makes me think of all the things that my parents need, who, by the way, have a Comfort Keepers caregiver in the
Right.
home to help my dad. So I am right there with understanding all of that. And for me, one of the best things is really thinking about for Comfort Keepers is that it's got to go beyond, though, just what the needs are physically, because for our older loved ones to do well and to stay who they are, they need more. And so it's beyond the physical. It has to be the emotional aspect, be bringing them joy, mental stimulation. And really the way that a senior is going to achieve that well-being and thrive at home, which is it's just way beyond just the physical, to make sure that they're doing well.
Well, I want to put an exclamation point on that for the audience because I think very often as our parents do get older and have more challenges physically, we are focusing on that physical barrier or obstacle or, things that they need help with from that perspective. We do forget that you still want a meaningful life. You still want passion and purpose and fun and happiness and all those things. And I think that's, as you said, equally important because those are the things that do help us keep going despite what our physical health issues might be.
Yeah.
You've been doing this National Day of Joy, and I love the fact that Comfort Keepers focuses really on that positive side of aging, positive psychology around happiness and joy and all of that. And just a full disclosure to the audience, I've been so honored to be part of that team, be one of your spokespersons out there on National Day of Joy as a gerontologist. But you've been doing the survey for 7 years, and tell us a little bit about what this year's survey found that it was consistent maybe with the previous surveys, but also what are the things that are kind of new and different and maybe even surprised you?
So we try to focus on a different topic every year. This year, we partnered with Talker Research and we spoke to 2,000 adults who were professional or maybe more family type caregivers. And we focused on a theme of the heart of caregiving. And it was really a lot about what our family and professional caregivers go through. And actually, one of the reasons that we did that is because we recognize that when we provide care, we are working with way more than the senior or the adult in our care. It is the family as well, and it's one of the reasons why we actually have partnered with PBS as the only home care sponsor. And we're so proud of it. And they just put out this 2-hour documentary on caregiving, which we'll talk about. But it's really that thing just kind of opened our eyes even more and said, let's really talk about what caregivers go through, even how they define themselves. So one of the things that we found is that 74% of those that are caring for somebody else, and I say that because they might not even define themselves as a caregiver. They find that caring for that other person is one of the most rewarding chapters of their lives. Um, 91% of them say that it actually really strengthened the bond they had with their senior loved one. And sort of
And
like
I
I was talking about, 53% of them told us that they actually don't even identify as a caregiver, which makes sense because even for me as a daughter, I don't know if I would have ever thought of myself as a caregiver, even though that's what I do is provide care, whether I'm there in person helping my parents with day-to-day tasks or helping them figure out like insurance things or banking things or providing that emotional support to my mom, like on the phone across the country.
And I think that's, that self-identification as a family caregiver is such a big hurdle for agencies and services and other organizations out there who want to help, our family caregivers. But if you don't identify, how do you kind of reach them and all of that? One of the things that I love is that you have always embraced the family caregivers as part of the whole aging, taking care of older adults and all that. I think very often we focus mostly on, the person who has the disability or the disease or whatever, and forget about that family caregiver. And your services really help two lives. I mean, it's the older adult, but it's also the family caregiver getting a break and getting some help, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that's a nice thing for caregivers to have so that they don't feel that all alone. When you say that it really strengthens their bond with their older loved one of the things that I remember from last year that you found is that a lot of caregivers said their older mom or dad was like their best friend. And I think that we're just continuing to see that there's a lot of silver linings in caregiving. Do you agree with that as a kind of a consistency through the surveys?
I do. And again, speaking from personal experience, even so, I'll tell you my personal story here, which is that my father, who just turned 90, he has he falls a lot. Right, this is a big problem with mobility. I mean, my mother, she's in her 80s, she can't pick him up. So I'm really happy that I'm going to be there. So they have the EMTs come to their house sometimes multiple times a day. And I told you that I just got married recently. And one of the reasons I mentioned that is because it was really important. I'm an older bride, but it was really important for me to have my father still do those things. It was important for me to have him do that because I think it helped him mentally get prepared to do things like walk me down the aisle and do the father daughter dance. So he prepared for months and months and months. And, before that, he had fallen. He was in a rehab facility for 30 days. And the difference I saw in him was actually profound and sad. Even though my mother went and visited him every single day for hours and hours, he just gave up. He started looking down.
Mm.
He couldn't even pick up a book. Didn't have the strength. He didn't read. He didn't watch TV. He barely talked to anybody. It was really sad. And I just thought, I don't even know if my dad's going to make it to the wedding. He clearly is not thriving. He's just really degrading. But in the time that it took him to sort of get ready to be in the wedding, he found his own sense of purpose. And then when we had a lot of other family members around, like the week of the wedding, he was a different person. I think he saw the value that he brought to the family, and he was a little stronger physically. He was trying to walk on his own. He was talking. He was reading books. He was talking about sports. It was just the change was profound. It's incredible. And this is sort of what I'm talking about. So, the role that we have as family caregivers in the lives of our older loved ones can change you and it can change them because I'll never forget it. It was actually really just incredible to see how much he's
Yeah.
changed. And then now that it's been, I guess, 3 months since the wedding now, you can see him sort of starting to decline again. So I'm
Mm.
hoping that being there in person will help. So these are some of the struggles of my poor mom that she goes through. And I applaud everybody out there that is trying to do the work they can to take care of
Right.
somebody else.
Well, maybe you can renew your vows every year. And he can get ready for that every year. Yeah, I found the same thing with my dad, because when he was given his diagnoses of prostate cancer stage 4, they only gave him like a couple of months to live. And so everybody, family and friends from afar came to visit him. And he actually lived for another 8 to 9 months, I think it was, because he was loving it.
Yes.
He had all these great conversations and it really picked him up. So I think we often again overlook that social aspect of health that is so critical. One of the things that I thought was interesting, and I don't know if you have any solutions for how we might help families solve this, but I think one of the survey results was that it one third, only one third of older adults actually have kind of a long-term care plan, end of life wishes plan, and then about only about 45% of them have really had that conversation then with their family about it. And you can correct me on those numbers if I'm wrong, but this is a dilemma because we don't want to be operating in a crisis, right? We want to try to understand what the needs and wishes are of our loved ones. What can we do to help make that better?
It's so funny because you're absolutely right. Nobody wants to have the conversation with their parents, and no older adult wants to have that conversation with their children. They
Yeah.
just don't want to accept it. And then, you go and you see your loved one and you sort of see that there are issues. So the best thing to do, and I think I actually learned this from you, and it's the 40-70 rule, right? Which is that
Yes.
maybe in your 40s, you start having a conversation with your parents when they're in their 70s. And it's, when you set it up ahead of time, there's less emotion because that all is planning for the future. There's no judgment. You just talk in a warm, compassionate way about how you plan for the future together, maybe small things that you may have seen already. And you just talk, say, like, let's keep the doctor involved. Let's set a plan. Let's see what he says about this diagnosis or why it is that this might be happening. And that to me is the best thing to do.
Yeah, I think, yeah, and you're right, that 40-70 rule. And it's tough because a lot of people, think, well, everybody's okay, so why should we talk about it now? But
Mhm.
that's the whole point. The other thing I found, and I don't know if you see this, with Comfort Keepers or either personally, my mom and my stepdad were very hesitant to talk about any details. They were kind of like, it's handled, don't worry about it. Here's the number of the attorney, so should something happen. But when my stepdad passed, my mom, now being a widow on her own, became much more open because I think she knew she needed that partnership. She needed that, advocacy. And so she was more willing to talk and share and do things that she was not when she had her partner and they were in it together kind of thing. Do you see that a lot with families?
Absolutely. And I think the key is maintain the parent-child relationship. I think that's the struggle. So as long as that parent feels like you're still maintaining the parent-child relationship, I get it. You're the mom, I'm the daughter. But to that end, like, hey, let me help you with this thing that's going to help us keep that relationship instead of making them feel like you're taking something over or that they don't have the ability to do something anymore. And I think as long as you have that tone, they're a lot more open to the help that we can provide them, because
Yeah.
that's the last thing we want to happen is, surprises happen. They don't know how to handle their finances, or they don't understand that, their husband had all these credit card bills and then they're not really aligned with how to pay those online, which is sort of what happened with my mom.
Yeah. And the cost of care is always, I think,
Yeah.
a big aha moment for families. So let's get into something you guys did this year, which was so wonderful. And it's this great partnership that you had with PBS. I think it was the PBS affiliate in Washington, D.C., but also the actor, director Bradley Cooper, who was an executive producer of this documentary on caregiving, which, if anyone hasn't seen it, you can still stream it. You can find it on the PBS Passport app. It is probably one of the best documentaries I've ever seen on caregiving, and the stories are so poignant. But tell us a little bit about how you got involved and, what you really want listeners to know is a takeaway from watching this documentary.
Well, yeah, as soon as we found out that PBS was producing a documentary on caregiving, we're like, how can we get involved? Because yes, it's great that it was executive produced by Bradley Cooper, who has family experience with caregiving. And he wanted to share this because the whole concept here is that we're sparking a national conversation around caregiving. Caregiving is sort of this untalked about, in some ways, burden, but also joy, of course, that people don't talk about. And so by really bringing to light the trials and tribulations and the struggles that family caregivers go through, or professional caregivers as well,
Mhm.
um, when you bring it to light, I think we think about as a nation how we can support people, provide those resources, whether it's people in the workplace or even legislation or just even recognition that people just might need a pat on the back or some encouraging word or a little bit of help, and respite, and that's what companies like Caregivers do. So this documentary that was produced by PBS, in conjunction with WIDA and also Wellbeing's organization. It's a 2 hours. and it's goes through the personal experiences and the challenges and the triumphs of I think 6 different families and what they experienced over their journey of being caregivers when they probably didn't think that was going to have to happen. And it's also accompanied by a series, I think 18 little short films that you can find online, which are just really sweet, wonderful, poignant vignettes that bring to life sort of what we're talking about.
Well, and one of the things I thought that was so great about the documentary, because there's been a lot of other documentaries out there about caregiving and the stories that are always so heartfelt. First of all, I love the stories because despite the obstacles and the challenges, you still got that sense of, again, joy, or I'm just so honored to be doing this for my dad, or whatever it was. But
Hmm.
the flip side that I thought was great for business people, and I've told all of, a lot of my clients are in the employer space. I've told HR directors, you've really got to watch this because they also take you through kind of a history of the funding of care and where we've been as a nation and where we are right now and what we're facing. And I think that's really important because that gets sometimes lost. And so when you mix that with the personal stories, I just thought it was really, really powerful. And then, as you said, they've also done these other smaller little stories, and you had a Comfort Keepers professional caregiver that was a highlight, right, in one of those stories.
We absolutely did. And actually, the story was picked up in People magazine too. But one of the digital shorts featured our caregiver, Christine Fadriga. And she came from the Philippines, and it talks about her story about how she cared for this client over many years. I think her name was Betty, and it's just a wonderful story. And you really understand the journey, both with the family, the client, as well as what Christine goes through as a caregiver.
Yeah. Well, and I think, for anyone listening out there whose parents may be or parent might be a little resistant to having someone like a professional caregiver come in, all I will say is that without exception, everybody that I've talked to has embraced that home care, like what Comfort Keepers delivers. They wind up having that professional caregiver really become part of the family and really be a shoulder to cry on or someone to lean on and ask questions of and be observant and give them insights that is so invaluable to the family member that they couldn't even imagine having done it without that person. So once you can get past that little hurdle of, okay, we've got to bring somebody in or whatever, it's just, I mean, I think it's one of the best things that you can do to care for your loved one because it gives you that break, but also then you're getting kind of that professional help and insights that you might not know as just a family member.
Yeah, and when we even talk to our internal teams, we talk about that a lot. Our client isn't just the adult in need, it is the family, because the family has just as strong of a need, especially emotionally and mentally and sometimes physically, as the client does. So the fact that we are able to not only provide and care for the client, but also in some ways the family member is it's really important. So it's the saying, you can't pour from an empty cup, right? So as a family member, you need a break, you need that respite care. And I even tell my mom this all the time: Mom, I know that you love your husband and you take care of him, and it's an honor for you to do that and a duty for you to do that, but I have to remind you that you are also a human being that is just as important. And if you don't take care of yourself, then that, shame on all of us for letting that happen, because you have to take care of every single person that's yourself as well as your loved one.
Or like you said, with your dad falling and your mom can't pick him up, just having someone there to help with those transitions, to make sure he's safe, getting to the chair, the
Yes.
couch, whatever. Even those little things are just so helpful.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, obviously, when she falls, it's when he falls because the caregiver isn't there, because we don't have a 24/7 caregiver. Because my mom is still too resistant to do that, but we're working on her. And also, it's the financial aspect of it, which is always something to consider, and we're working through.
Yeah, I know that's tough because recently we had a family friend who actually did get a 24/7 hour, 3 shifts of professional
Mhm.
caregivers. The cost, of course, was through the roof. They did it for 2 years. It was really, it's a number that boggles the mind. And but it was something that they wanted to do because he just absolutely did not want to go into any kind of nursing home
Yeah.
or assisted living. The other thing we should mention is, we're hearing now, because we're living longer, more and more people are being diagnosed with Alzheimer's or with a certain type of
Mhm.
dementia, maybe it's Parkinson's, whatever. And, a lot of people think, well, the minute that happens, they've got to go into memory care, or, we've got to get them into some kind of skilled nursing. But we can actually keep our loved ones home with those types of diagnoses for a pretty long time. I mean, maybe throughout the whole disease, although I know it becomes really, really tough at the end because, again, you almost have to have that 24/7 vigilance. But talk a little bit about the fact that comfort keepers can really help with that.
Oh, absolutely. We probably have at least half of our clients have a form of Alzheimer's or diagnosis. I mean, and there's a few parts of it. One of them is the caregiver. So we have special training for caregivers so that they are better able to understand how to work with an Alzheimer's client, because the needs are different, because they tend to have more acute needs physically as well as mentally. And so, and then that's also really hard on the families. So having resources, and we work with like the Alzheimer's Association to provide, they, for example, they have a great 800 number. It's a hotline. So our caregivers can use it as well as the families use it to say, hey, my mom is going through sundowners and this is happening right now. What do I do about it? And it's really a great resource. So we do whatever we can to help the families, to help the clients, and you absolutely can keep your loved one at home through, end of life, even with Alzheimer's, with
Sure.
the right training and the right support in the home.
Well, and you're nationwide. A lot of the home care agencies are more local, but you've got obviously coverage across the country. I think it's more than 600 franchisees under the Comfort Keepers name. And one of the other great things is that, very often we think it's a service like transportation. You call up, you get the car service, whatever we call it, we get home care.
Mhm.
But actually, you've got your executives in those franchises across the country who help really put together a plan, right? And help
Yeah.
maybe even guide you to, because we know a lot of this is certainly out of pocket costs, but there might be maybe like the VA has some benefits for respite care, or there might be some ways that you could get certain things maybe covered, and you kind of help a little bit with that. I mean, you don't do the full, like, hey, we'll take on all your finances for you, but you do kind of help, right, families understand where they might be able to
Yes. I
save.
mean, absolutely. We are there to support. So when families have questions, we do whatever we can, because obviously we do this for many clients every single day, where any client is thinking this is their one time of having to deal with it. They don't understand it. So we can absolutely, many of our offices will help them navigate through those questions and to help try to figure it out for them.
Yeah. So, I know that the National Day of Joy, that you guys really have been behind that big movement, usually happens at the end of June. But we really can celebrate joy every day. Tell us some of maybe the really fun activities or the things that your professional caregivers have done with their family clients, to bring about that kind of joy. What are the stories that you've heard?
So just those everyday, we call them daily doses of joy. And the key is, we talked about having a personalized plan. We have to get to know the clients as well as we can and understand the things that bring them joy. And those are the things that we try to do. So you have a client who is a history buff. Maybe you can watch history specials together. Somebody else, they are an avid reader, but it's just hard for them to do. So maybe they start a two-person book club with the caregiver, right? We know that, for some of our clients, they just aren't able to take care of a pet anymore, but they really care about that. So we've actually had caregivers go transfer the client to, let's say, an SPCA and play with puppies there, which is really great. Or somebody who just is an avid baker and they just don't really have the skills or the ability, let's say, to roll out dough anymore, do some of those things. We have them sit in a chair, and the caregiver can then actually, they will teach the caregiver how to make the recipe, and then the caregiver will follow their instructions and try to make the recipe, which is a really fun activity to do. And there's just so many more of those.
Yeah, that sounds really great. I wrote in my second book, Meet to Monday, that my dad, who had been actually a professional race car driver in his life, his car was everything. And even though he
Oh,
had oxygen tanks and everything, we got a little portable oxygen tank and we would go on joy rides. We'd just hit the road and maybe go back, and we're close enough to a hometown where we grew up. We'd go and kind of tool around the hometown. But it was I could see the joy in him when he wasn't just sitting at home
Oh, I
being,
bet.
the man with cancer waiting to die kind of thing. So, yeah, I think those are so important. And again, those little moments of joy are just so critical. Sadia, it's always so wonderful to talk to you. You always have such great insights and great things that Comfort Keepers is doing. Is there anything we didn't cover that you want the audience to know about?
Just remember that when you are working with, let's say it's your aging loved one, it's just they are the same person they've always been, and that's how they want to be treated. And we really think about the two words are possibility and positivity. We're not thinking about the limitations that they have. We're thinking about with them what's still possible. And then it's just really all about love. We're just so it's really important to just continue to recognize the work that our caregivers are doing and that our family caregivers are even doing. I was at a PBS screening the other day, and somebody on stage called caregiving a national act of love. And
Mm.
I thought that was just so true and it's just so right on.
Absolutely. And we've got to get more support for our professional caregivers, because you think about the job
Mhm.
that they're doing to help families, and it's completely invaluable.
Yes.
And I know they do it out of love, because they're certainly not doing it to become multimillionaires. Right?
Yeah.
So anyway, well, Saudi, again, it's so great to talk to you. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. And we're going to have links on our episode guide page, but tell the audience where they can find out more about Comfort Keepers and also the National Day of Joy and the
Yeah,
PBS.
just go right to comfortkeepers.com. You can
Okay.
see where we have care. It's an easy way to find care all across the country, but also we have an info center. We have so many articles and so much good information and content about how to help navigate the whole caregiving journey with your loved ones.
That's great. Yeah, that's really helpful. I know a lot of people really tap into those. So, well, again, Sadia, thank you for coming back. And we know we'll have you back next year as well. So we'll look
Awesome. All
forward to
right.
that. All
And I'll tell
right.
you about what it's like to be in Florida then.
Absolutely. All right.
Thanks.
Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.
Wasn't that such a great interview with Sadia? It always is. I always love talking to her. She always has such great things to share. And I love the survey that they do every year, because it really focuses on the positive of caregiving for both our older adults who are needing the care, but also our family caregivers and our professional caregivers. So, really great to talk to Sadia, and I really appreciate her being on. Now, let's switch to our well home design news. And as I mentioned earlier, National Sandwich Generation Month in July. I just wanted to share a couple of quick study surveys that came out, because as we know, as we start to look at what the needs are for the sandwich generation, we're seeing an uptick in multi-generational homes. So making that plan maybe to have an ADU that becomes kind of like the granny apartment that we often hear about, or moving in with your older parents perhaps to save some money, and that all of the things that come with that. I actually do a webinar for my employer clients on a lot of this, but there were some cost of care surveys that came out, and I just wanted to share these with you because I think they're really important and they're very focused on sandwich generation. So Edward Jones did a survey, and it showed that most financial planners need to help educate clients about caregiving costs, especially the sandwich generation, and the cost of living options, because very often the financial planner may not be probing or may not be asking certain questions. So it becomes really important. And I do a lot of work within the financial services industry, and I write a column for one of their journals. But that we really need to get financial planners in tune with the sandwich generation, and then it starts earlier. This is starting in your 40s, but it could start in your 30s, and or even your late 20s. And so how do we help guide clients in order to plan ahead for some of those costs that can be really like sticker shock, right? And the thing I think that most people, most caregivers, and I've done this now for 20 years, and I hear this again and again, is that they thought Medicare would cover long-term care. So in other words, if their loved one needs to go in assisted living or memory care or even a skilled nursing facility, they thought Medicare covers that, and it does not. It's all based on your loved one's savings, your savings, and your ability to maybe help them. Whatever Social Security benefits they have, whatever their pot of money is that they can use, that is what covers those long-term care costs in those different communities, as well as bringing someone into the home that can care for your loved one if you would prefer to keep them at home. And I know that I think it's now, there was a survey by ARP, people over the age of 50, 75% of them are saying, no, I definitely want to stay in my home as long as possible. Used to be a little bit higher, but also the stats changed because they used to probe people over 65. Now they've gone a little younger. I think maybe some of the younger generation is open to some of the senior living options that are out there, but most people want to stay in their home. And that can be, as I mentioned, I think on our last episode, and if not, it's worth repeating. Um, a very dear friend of mine was taking care of his mom, and they kept her at home. She had Parkinson's, and then she did ultimately also develop some dementia with her Parkinson's, but they had 3 in-home caregivers on shifts of 8 hours each, and so it was full-time, 24/7, in addition to them, he and his brother being there to help out and do some other little things for his mom, but it cost them $300,000 a year to do that. I mean, I know California is a little bit higher than some other parts of the country, but yeah, it's a big, big number. So we have to be mindful of what these costs are and how are we gonna manage that, but it definitely becomes family planning. Um, the other thing is the Wall Street Journal had done a big article on the sandwich generation a few months ago, and I just wanted to quote some things from the article. A 40-something person, age 40 something, so that's a typical sandwich generation caregiver, contributing $1,500 a month over 5 years to support an aging parent stands to lose more than $1 million in retirement savings, according to an analysis by Steph Wagner, a national director of Women in Wealth at Northern Trust Wealth Management. So that's talking about the leave of absence that you take to care for your loved one, or even not the leave of absence, just the contribution that you might make. And if you do step away from work for a while to do that, you're going to walk away from a lot of money. So I know previous studies have said it's anywhere between 250,000 to 360,000. Well, this is now getting up into the $1 million range of pay and benefits and bonuses and 401k matching and all those other things that you can get through your employer that you might be walking away from. So it's a big, again, that's a big conversation to have if you have a financial planner, and if you don't, it's just something to know about so you can plan appropriately. The article also said the financial pressures are also growing for the sandwich generation, and this is according to a care.com survey of 2,000 parents. 60% of U.S. families spent 20% or more of their annual household income on childcare last year, up from 51% of families in 2021. Meanwhile, the median cost of a home health aide to come in and help with an aging parent climbed 10% last year to $75,000, actually $75,500. And this is from the Cost of Care survey, which is a really great tool you can find online. It's actually managed by Genworth Financial, but it gives you a national average, but then it breaks it down by state. So you can really find out what home care costs, what adult daycare costs, what assisted living costs, what nursing home costs, all of these different things that are your options. It's a great, great tool to use. So I wanted to just share that. And then really quickly, I mentioned earlier our self-care in 7 minutes video series. Now we put those out every Monday. There are Me Time Monday Wellness Hack. It's all taken from the research and the writing in my book, Me Time Monday. And I just want to do a shout out for the ones that we're doing in July. So we had one on the Caregiver Bill of Rights. You may want to check that out. That's our version of the Caregiver Bill of Rights. We also did one on a fun one on Alice in Wonderland theme, and it's about how do you build resiliency as a caregiver. As I mentioned, we're going to post on July 22nd, the International Self-Care Day. This is 10 ideas from 10 different countries on how caregivers can find those maybe 7 minutes to do a little self-care me time. And then we're also going to do 7 hacks to build your social wellness. That'll be our fourth one for our July series. So I hope you can check those out. You can find those all on our YouTube channel, where you hopefully are also maybe watching this podcast. And of course, you can find our podcast on all the listening channels, Amazon Music, Apple, Google, Sirius XM, et cetera, et cetera. But we also do a video version on YouTube, and you should subscribe to us so that you'll get a little ping every time we post something new. And with that, we will say thank you so much for joining us for our July episode. Thank you for joining us on this episode. A reminder, you can find more information in my book, Me Time Monday, The Weekly Wellness Plan to Find Balance and Joy for a Busy Life, or visit MeTimeMonday.com or CaregivingClub.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Caregiving Club on Air. Please hit the subscribe button. To listen to us on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, SiriusXM, iHeartRadio, Pandora, as well as other listening channels. Check out all the resources and article links on our episode guide page at caregivingclub.com. Just hit the podcast tab at the top and email us with comments and questions at podcast@caregivingclub.com. Thank you again for listening, and take care and stay well.